Hello and welcome to Arizona State University and the Center for Services Leadership. Today we have a webinar with a special guest. Our board member webinar today is going to talk about goldfish, and Stan Phelps is the perfect guy to talk to us about that. Just a few words about Stan. He is an IBM futurist. He has spoken at TEDx. He's a Forbes contributor. He has spoken at so many events that I don't even know if I could ever attend, let alone speak at that many events, but hundreds of events that he has spoken at. He is also, before focusing on the writing and speaking, held leadership positions at IMG, Adidas, and the PGA. He was the Chief Solutions Officer at Synergy, a award-winning marketing agency working on brands such as KFC, M&M's, Walmart, and Starbucks. He has an undergraduate degree in marketing, which we of course love here from the center because we are of course composed mainly of marketing faculty. So we love seeing folks from the degree in marketing background. But he also has a JD MBA, probably because the MBA just by itself wasn't keeping him busy enough. So he had to add a JD to that. Also, he was a guest of the center and a speaker at our board one-day field trip at the Boeing facility in South Carolina, where we get to meet Stan and find out that in addition to all the things I just said, he's just an amazing and cool guy. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Stan. Stan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Thomas, and I appreciate being here. I am coming to you today from not Paris, but from the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. This is where I reside. I'm in a town called Cary, North Carolina, with my wife, Jennifer, two boys, Thomas and James. I always like to share this as a fact. We moved here just over 7 years ago. And when we made the move from the New York area down to North Carolina, if you're a fan of the show House Hunters on HGTV, my family and I ended up doing the show, which was a very interesting experience. And I tell people I learned in my 21 minutes of fame that there's not a lot of reality in reality television. Thomas mentioned I write for Forbes. This is actually my last 3 articles from the last 10 days or so. Yesterday I tackled an interesting idea of in customer experience, we spend so much time on measuring, but not enough time on action. It was a report from CMOs and their take on customer experience adoption. If you get a chance and you want to look into that. What are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about this idea of a purple goldfish. So we're going to break it up into 5 different parts. The first part is I'm going to share, I think, the 2 most important factors that influence customer experience and that are important in terms of creating wow. Second, I'll share what I think the biggest myth in marketing is. We'll jump in and I'll share kind of the basis around a purple goldfish, sharing a word worth traveling to New Orleans to get. We'll break down 5 of the 10 different types of purple goldfish in 2 main categories to give you some examples of companies that are leveraging these little extras to create differentiation. And lastly, I'll review it's a 12-step framework. It's called the IDEA framework for how do you actually apply this yourself and create your own very own purple goldfish. So that's the plan. That's the roadmap. First, though, I want to start with a story. And this picture was taken a number of summers ago. This is Brandon Cook. His grandmother, he was visiting his grandmother in the hospital. Unfortunately, his grandmother was literally down to her last days. She had pancreatic cancer, which I didn't realize, but it's literally one of the worst forms you can get. towards the end, you get to the point where you can just no longer eat. And here is Brandon visiting his grandmother. He's pleading with her to have something. And finally, she looks at her grandson. She says, Brandon, she says, you know what I would really like? She says, I'd really like some soup. But she said, not the crap they serve here at the hospital. She still had a little bit of a sense of humor. She says, what I would really like is a bread bowl of clam chowder. Now, this happened to happen in New England, up in New Hampshire. I tell people, if you're not from San Francisco, where do you have to go if you want to get a bread bowl of clam chowder? You go to Panera. So she wanted a bread bowl of clam chowder from Panera. Herein lied the challenge. This was a Monday during the summer. And during the summer, Panera only serves clam chowder on Fridays. But that wasn't going to stop Brandon. Being the millennial he is, he simply reached into his pocket, he grabbed his mobile phone, and within 1 minute, he was on the phone with Sue, who was the store manager in Nashua, New Hampshire. And he explains the predicament, his grandmother's wish, and Sue says, Brandon, stop. She says, come on down. We'd be more than happy to help you out. So he drives the 10 minutes. He meets Sue and the team. They give Brandon a couple bread bowls of clam chowder to share. In fact, they were even thoughtful enough, they threw in a little thing of cookies that he could also bring back. And he went back to the hospital, and as Brandon describes it, he just had a wonderful lunch with his grandmother. For that short time, it made her happy. It sustained her. And as he's driving home that afternoon, he thinks to himself, that was just a little thing that Sue and the team did. But it meant so much to him and his grandmother that he decided when he would get home, he would write about the experience. Now, I always like to ask this, how do we know Brandon Cook is a good kid? I mean, of course he's a good kid. He's visiting his grandmother in the hospital. How do we know 100% for sure, though? It's because he's friends with his mom on Facebook. And so his mom, Gail, sees the post that Brandon wrote. She's so moved by it, she copies it, and she places it here. This is Panera's Facebook page. And that's when something really magical happened. Because 2 weeks later, someone pointed this out to me, and I immediately liked the post. I was the 810,000th, 801st person to like this post. This post got nearly 36,000 comments, many of which came from Panera's own employees that said, this is a reason why I work here at Panera. Now, why did this move so many people? This small little thing that Panera did. I think people could probably see themselves in Brandon's shoes. We all think maybe about our grandparents and what it might have been like. I like to tell people that I'd like to think if I was the manager and someone called me, that I would have been thoughtful enough to do the little extra. But what I may see here as common sense is definitely not common practice. And so to set up this, I share this story because I want to make the point of why so many people responded so strongly to this story. And it's based upon how our brain has evolved as human beings. Now, my wife likes to call this my Homer sapien brain. She thinks I have a small brain. But as we've evolved as human beings, we are literally hardwired as humans to respond to situations like this. Think about it. As we walked out of the cave, our survival depended upon us making very quick assessments of everyone and everything that we came into contact with. In fact, in a split second, we answered 2 questions of everything or every person and every brand that we experience. And in a split second, here are the 2 questions. What is this brand's intent towards me? And then very quickly, number 2, what's their ability to carry out that intent? What is their intent? What's their ability to carry out that intent? And it turns out just those 2 things, literally 80% of how we view other people comes down to just those 2 factors. Over 50% of how we view the brands that we deal with, just those 2 factors. And if you break them down, that intent piece is what social psychologists would say is warmth, and the ability to carry it out is competence. And so you can actually matrix this out. And if you want to go deeper on this, there's a tremendous book. I don't recommend many books, but this is a tremendous book by Chris Malone, used to be the CMO of Aramark and Choice Hotels, and Susan T. Fisk, who's one of the most prominent social psychologists in the world. And here's the thing, if you matrix it out, on that y-axis, you can be seen as high warmth or you can be seen as low warmth. And then on that horizontal x-axis is competence. And you can be seen as high competence or low competence. So let's break down these 4 examples. Where would you put BP on this scale? And I want you to imagine for a second that you live in the Gulf region in the southeastern part of the United States. And I've asked this through hundreds of audiences. People undoubtedly say they belong in the bottom left, low and low. And how do we feel when we have to deal with brands or people that show that they don't care, they don't have a high sense of warmth, and 2, what they deliver is not a high state of competence? We feel a sense of anger or disgust. In fact, when we experience that brand or that person, we will go out of our way to tell other people not to do business with that person or that brand. Now, I tell people, does anyone want to put their cable company right here next to BP? How about the U.S. Postal Service? Where would you put the Postal Service? Now, some people would say right next to BP. I always like to share my personal experience. My mailman for the first 5 years I lived here in North Carolina, his name was Joe. He would drive up each day in the Jeep, and he would always give my dog McMurphy a little dog biscuit. If you saw Joe, his smile would literally make your day. But I tell people, if I needed to get a package to LA tomorrow from North Carolina, is there any chance I'm going to walk into the post office? And I would say probably not. So I think you can make a case that they try hard, but maybe not consistent enough from a competence perspective. And how do we feel when we deal with brands or people that have the right intention but can't necessarily follow through? We might have a feeling of pity or sadness like we're rooting for them to do better. You could put organizations like the VA hospital up here in the top left. Maybe even put Amtrak up there as well. How about Rolex? Where does Rolex fit on this matrix? They make one of the best timepieces in the world, but I would argue, in my opinion, that they're not the warmest of brands. They're a little exclusive. So I think you could make the case that they're right here in the bottom right. And how do we feel about brands that are very good at what they do, but aren't warm? The feeling we might get is a sense of envy or jealousy. Interesting enough, though, I didn't figure this out till recently. Rolex is actually a nonprofit. So literally all of the profit that they make goes towards charitable causes. Interesting thing. I didn't realize that. Where does Panera fit on this? And I would argue why people responded so strongly to Brandon Cook and his grandmother is what they saw as a brand that was both high warmth and high competence. And if you can make it up here to the top right as a brand, you're going to engender a feeling of pride in the people that do business with you. And in fact, people will hold that brand close. They will purposefully go out of their way to do what? Tell other people that they should do business with that brand. What I like about the Panera example and brands that do this, they don't reside in the logical area of the brain. They make a concerted effort to actually reach the heart of the customers and the employees that they have. And it turns out that distance between the stem of your brain and the top of your heart is only 9 inches. But I would argue it's the most difficult and arduous 9 inches in marketing. And what's interesting is that literally almost 90% of the people on this webinar right now, these 9 inches apply to you personally. Because if we were all in the same room together, I would ask you to spread your fingers out, because male and female, the distance between your thumb and your pinky is exactly 9 inches. And again, that's where I believe where great brands make that effort. I'm such a big fan of this. This is actually my license plate here in North Carolina. Believe it or not, you can get the inch mark, which is like reason number 87 why North Carolina is awesome. I'm going to make the assertion today that if you can think about the experience that you provide and you can do the little things to show that you are both high warmth and high competence, that it's going to make a big difference in the experience that you provide and the results for your brand. Now, can little things make a big difference? Let me share an example that I really think drives this home. So a number of years ago, this study was published in the International Journal of Marketing. And what they did was they went to a QSR, a quick serve restaurant, fast casual, and they wanted to gauge the impact of two things. First, what would the impact be if you were greeted warmly when you walked into the restaurant? And two, what would be the impact if you were given a small gift before ordering? So two things that happened before you even ordered food, and they wanted to see how that would work out. Now, here is the thing. The gift was nothing extravagant. The gift was either you got a keychain or you got a small thing of yogurt. And here's the thing, and the greeting was just simply a warm greeting when somebody walked through the door. So again, wanted to measure the impact of the gift and the greeting. So there were 4 groups that they had. Now the first one was simply this. It was the control group. This was, you walked through the door, you didn't get greeted, you didn't get a gift. The second group, you got the greeting, but not the gift. The third group, you got the gift, but not the greeting. And of course, the fourth group, you got both. How did that impact people's experience? And more importantly, how much they ordered? So here's the deal. If you were in the control group, no greeting and no gift, on average, you purchased $7.11 of food. If you got the greeting when you walked through the door, that jumped to $8.39. If you got the gift, but not a greeting, and think about this for a second, you're giving someone food, in the case of getting yogurt, before they ordered more food, wouldn't that decrease the amount that they potentially order? Not in the least. On average, if you got the gift but not the greeting, $9.39. And here's the tipper. If you were in that fourth group and you got both, on average, you purchased $10.41. Do little things make a big difference? The difference between not getting a greeting or a gift and getting both was a 46% lift in sales. Now that's not all. When they talked to the people that got the greeting and the gift, the NPS scores were higher, the overall satisfaction was higher, and it was an overall better experience. I do think little things can make a big difference. And I think it's important that we think about the experience we provide and how important is this as we compete going forward. Gartner did research recently. They talked to companies and they said, what's the number one thing that you're going to compete on going forward? And 89% of the companies said that they will compete mostly on the experience that they provide to their customers. What's amazing to me, they've done this each and every year. You only have to go back 7 years ago, and that number was just 36%. And I'm going to make the case with the rest of the half hour or so that we have is that how you differentiate going forward is going to be through the experience that you create to drive home both that warmth and that competence. Now, a little bit, this is blacked out for a reason because this is a confession on my part. My first 2 decades in marketing, I didn't focus on the customer. In fact, everything I did was focused on the eyes and the ears of the prospect. Literally, the stuff that I did with Adidas, the PGA, even Synergy, was all about eyeballs and earlobes. How could we maximize the amount of impressions and drive awareness? And I did crazy stuff. Really, I'll show you really quickly. I did things like I helped create the world's largest logo. We did it for KFC. We built it out in Nevada right next to Area 51. And it was so big, you literally could see it from space. And I know that because we shot it with the Google satellite. I've done things like, and by the way, this program right here, 650 million media impressions. It went viral. I've done things like create a 70-foot tall M&M, put it on a barge, and float it right into New York Harbor. This was to launch a new website for Mars. We literally sailed it right in front of Lady Liberty herself. I used to live in the Pacific Northwest for one day in New York City. This was exciting. I helped launch the everyday coffee for Starbucks. We literally rebuilt the original store in Bryant Park in New York City for one day. That's Howard Schultz. I don't know if we still call him Candidate Schultz, but he said it was the largest and the loudest marketing event in the history of Starbucks. Here's a fun one I did for Walmart. I put a 40-foot Viking ship into Times Square. This was to launch all of the merchandise for a movie called How to Train Your Dragon. And I tell people when I put a 40-foot Viking ship into Times Square, I thought to myself, Stan, this is bordering on ridiculous. And I thought maybe I'd jump the shark, but not till I did this next program, and wait for it. I once gave away a Mediterranean island for I can't believe it's not butter. And it gets better with this guy, Fabio. And what I realized was I wasn't part of the solution going forward. I was just part of the problem. And I knew that marketing was changing. And sure, these programs, a lot of them were successful. But what they weren't was either scalable and they weren't sustainable. And I thought to myself, there had to be a better way. And literally a decade ago, I had something happen to me that changed the direction of my life. And it happened in Manhattan. I'm at one of these rooftop bars in Manhattan, enjoying as you only can a $15 beer. And I'm with a colleague. We're about to go to a networking event. And I notice this older gentleman sitting next to me. And he's by himself, and every few minutes I can see him scan the room like he's waiting for someone to show up. And a half an hour passes and no one's showing up for this guy. And so I start to feel bad for him. It's awkward. And so I lean in just to start conversation. I go, excuse me. I said, do you know we spend 10% of our life waiting? Now I tell people I told him it was true because I had once read that on the internet. So it had to be true. And we started talking about the etiquette of being on time and waiting. And literally this guy said something to me that changed the direction of my life. He said, on time, he said, no one in life is ever on time. I said, wait a second. I've been on time before, not often, but, and he raised his finger to me, and you can't see this, but he gave me the Dikembe finger wave. And he looked at me in the eye and he goes, no. He said, no one in life is ever on time. He said, people in life are either early or they're late. And I literally took the train home to Connecticut that night, and I thought to myself, that same reasoning applies in business and in marketing, especially with the customers that we already have. And this was a simple idea. No one just simply meets the expectations of a customer. here's the thing, you either exceed their expectations or you fall short. And I believe to this day that the biggest myth that we perpetrate in business is simply the idea of meeting expectations. Because no one just simply meets expectations. It's not enough just to meet expectations or satisfy the customers that we have. In fact, research will show that literally people who say that they're satisfied or even very satisfied, that's exactly what they say right before they defect to go to another brand. And so 10 years ago, I started to look for companies that purposefully did little things to enhance the experience. And I remember at the time, literally Amazon had just purchased Zappos for over $1 billion. Now, Zappos is in less than a decade did what people thought was impossible. They said, you'll never be able to sell shoes online. And they grew their business to be $1 billion a year business with literally spending no money on traditional marketing. And they did it through the experience that they provided and the little things that went above and beyond to promote their brand. They took care of the customers that they had, and those customers brought them the customers that they wanted. But I thought there had to be more companies out there. So a decade ago, I created a crowdsourcing project. We called it the Purple Goldfish Project. And I set out to find 1,000 examples. I just didn't want the Zappos of the world. I wanted to learn how other brands purposely did the little extra to create that customer wow. Now, here's the thing. I call them a purple goldfish. Let me break down the metaphor. Why purple and why a goldfish? We'll start with the goldfish first. The goldfish was originally inspired by Kimpton Hotels. Kimpton, if you've ever stayed there, totally gets the guest experience. In fact, if you stay at a Kimpton property, there's always complimentary gourmet coffee in the lobby. In the afternoon, they do wine tasting. They're super pet friendly. If you've got a dog, you can bring your dog for free. They treat him or her like a king. But here's one that I loved at the time. If you were staying at certain Kimpton properties, and maybe you were there with your family, you're missing your family pet, Kimpton would give you a pet goldfish for your stay. And it was a program that they called Guppy Love. And I love this as a little thing that they do, a little extra to go above and beyond. Something that was signature to their brand that gave people a reason to talk about their experience with Kimpton. Now, the goldfish thing happens to be also really personal for me, because maybe some of you on this webinar right now, maybe your first pet as well was a goldfish. This was me when I was 6 years old. I'll never forget it. I went to a carnival. I threw that ping pong ball, and I came home with my very first pet. Plastic bag goldfish. And I remember the goldfish that I got wasn't very big. It maybe was an inch or an inch and a half. And come to find out that the average goldfish just grows to be 3 inches in length. But what stunned me was this. And I've spoken for Guinness World Records, so I've verified this. You're looking right now at the world's largest goldfish. It comes from the Netherlands, and it's nearly 20 inches in length. Now, important, it's not a carp, it's not even a koi, it is an average ordinary goldfish, and it's literally 6 times the size of average. Think about that for a second. Imagine yourselves bumping into somebody who is 6 times your size. You walk out of your house or apartment this morning and you bump into somebody who's 3 stories tall. And that intrigued me. Why average and why did others get bigger? And the reason being is that for a goldfish, their growth is affected by just 5 factors. And here's the thing, those same 5 factors apply to each and every business that's on this webinar today. So I'm going to break down the 5 goldfish growth factors, and I'm going to tell you how it relates to your brand. So I think most people have heard this about a goldfish. Their size is dependent upon the bowl or the pond that they're in. And this is a direct correlation. The bigger the bowl, the bigger the pond, the more they typically grow. So if you're in business, what's the size of the bowl or the pond? It's simply this. It's the market that you serve. And the bigger the market, either geographically or total market size, the more you can grow. Here's the second factor. Their growth is also impacted by the amount of other goldfish that are in that bowl or pond. Who are the other goldfish if you're in business? Your competitors. And this is an inverse relationship. The less goldfish, the more that they grow. Same thing, the less competition you have, the easier it's going to be to grow. Here's the third thing, the quality of the water that goldfish is in. And the more nutrients, the more clear the water is, the more they will typically grow. If it's nutrient poor and it's cloudy, they typically won't grow a lot. Now, I want you to think kind of macro for this, for business, outside of your own organization. What's the quality of the water or that environment? It's this, it's the economy. And think about it, your ability to get capital to grow your business, the impact that things like tariffs or regulations might have on you, or even consumer confidence and people's willingness to spend will all impact your growth. Here's the fourth one for a goldfish. How it does in the first 4 months of life will determine ultimately how big they get. So a goldfish, when they're born, they're minuscule. They have about 100 brothers and sisters. They're about the size of a top of a pin. In fact, you call a baby goldfish is called a fry, as in small fry. So what's the equivalent if you're in business for your first 120 days? Well, it's your time as a startup. Or if you offer a new product or service, how that does in the first 4 months will be critical in determining how big it can get. Here's the fifth thing, genetic makeup. So what is that goldfish born with genetically that separates it from all of the other goldfish? And the stronger their genes are, the more that they're separated, typically the bigger they grow. The weaker their genes are, the more they're like everyone else, the less they typically grow. What's genetic makeup for your brand? It's simply this. It's how you're different from your competition. How do you stand out in what I would call a sea of sameness? And part of that is the products and the services that you provide. But I believe we're increasingly living in what some would call an age of equivalency. And so it's harder and harder to stand out on simply product features or overall service. That differentiation going forward is about the experience that you provide and how that drives your differentiation. Now, here's the thing. Of these 5 factors, assuming you've been in business already for 4 months, what do you have control over? I would argue the only thing you have control over is how you differentiate what you do, and more importantly, how you design that service. All right, so if that's the goldfish bit, now why purple? So purple is an ode to this iconic American city, which of course is New Orleans, specifically to its most famous event, which is Mardi Gras. And here's the thing, it is attributed to New Orleans because there's one word that comes from New Orleans that exemplifies this idea of doing a little bit more. And it's one word that Mark Twain, all the way back in the 1800s, said was worth traveling all the way to New Orleans to get. And that one word is called lagniappe. And lagniappe literally means the additional, it's French and Spanish, it's Creole. It means the additional gift or to give more. So it was customary if you were in New Orleans for the business to do a little something extra, something that went above and beyond to honor the relationship that you had with the customer. And I mentioned we went on a quest to find 1,001 examples. I wish I could tell you that it was easy. It wasn't. People would send me examples. I would write about them. People would send me more examples. But what was interesting is you look across literally hundreds of examples, you start to see patterns of how you could do this. And just over 2 years after I started, we hit the 1,001st example. And it was very clear that as you looked across all 1,000 plus, that there was essentially 10 ways that you could do this. 5 of which fell into a bucket that we call value, and 5 which are in a bucket that we call maintenance. And so value is a very subjective thing. I don't believe people ever buy on price. They buy on the value that they perceive. And so it's the idea of how do you go a little above and beyond to do a little bit more? Maintenance is about the effort that someone has to put when they do business with you. What is it like for me to do business? And how you manage that, and you manage that effort, and how easy you make it for me can make a huge difference. So let's do this. We're going to break down. I'm going to share 2 types of value, 3 types of maintenance. So let's jump in. You already now know what a purple goldfish is. If I said to you, DoubleTree by Hilton, what's their classic throwing? They've been doing it since the 1980s. It's the chocolate chip cookie. And it's that, think about this, it's not an ordinary chocolate chip cookie. It's a warm welcome right when you check in to DoubleTree. They've been doing it all the way since the 1980s. They're on track this year to give away their 500 millionth cookie. You think about how people actually select hotels. Do people make a decision about staying at a DoubleTree just because they give away a cookie? Damn right they do. In fact, good friend of mine, Jeff Hazlett, used to be the CMO of Kodak. He says he loves these cookies so much. He says he dreams about them when he stays at other hotels. All right, that's throw in. Second type is what we call sampling. And here's the thing. We typically think about sampling as something that we do to get a prospect to become a customer. But I believe sampling is actually the lowest hanging fruit in marketing. And why couldn't you leverage it for the customers that you already serve? I collected over 1,000 examples. This is my favorite because of the simplicity of it. This is Izzy's Ice Cream, which is based out of St. Paul, Minnesota. When you order a scoop of ice cream at Izzy's, they let you pick a second flavor. You get a little mini scoop on top. That little mini scoop is called the Izzy Scoop. You order 2 scoops of ice cream, you can pick 2 Izzy's. What's amazing to me is that research will show you that for customers that already do business with your brand, so people that are already giving you money, of 100% of what you can do for them, right? 100% of your products and services, on average, what do your current customers know of that 100%? On average, it's about 20%. So why wouldn't you give them a little taste of the additional things that you could do? Sampling is something you should be thinking about for the customers that you already have. Let's jump into the 3 types of maintenance. First type is what we call added service. This is SafeLight. SafeLight has really developed a very good job of developing what I would call an effortless experience. So if you need to get a replacement or a repair on your windshield, they will come to your home or office. They send you a picture of the technician. You literally can track the technician in their vehicle on your phone as they come to you. But if it's for a repair, what they typically do is have this thing where they drill a hole into the crack, and then they put an epoxy resin to fill the hole, and it takes 10 minutes for that epoxy to cure and harden. So what does the technician do? They typically go back to their van, they grab glass cleaner, and they grab a vacuum. And what do they do for the remainder of that time? They do the entire interior of the car. So when you walk out, not only does your windshield look like it's brand new, but the interior of your car and your glass looks like you're just rolled off the showroom floor. Totally unexpected. Second type, convenience. How convenient are you for the customers that you serve? This is TD Bank, Toronto Dominion Bank, on the east coast of the US. They bill themselves as America's most convenient bank. Many of their branches open 7 days a week. In fact, this is a trick that TD does. Even the times on the door that are stated, they will open the doors 15 minutes early, and they won't close the doors till 15 minutes later. Last type is waiting. And here's the thing, if you're successful in business, your customers are going to have to wait. But if you can handle that waiting, it can be a differentiator. In fact, National Car Rental bills themselves as the company, if you're a pro, where you can avoid the wait.
I get it all the time. Have you lost weight? Of course I have. Ever since I started renting from National. Because National lets me lose the weight at the counter and choose any car in the aisle. And I don't wait when I return, thanks to Drop and Go. At National, I can lose the weight and keep it off. Looking good, Patrick. I know. Go National. Go like a pro.
All right, so that's the 3 types of maintenance. What I want to do really quickly right now is take you through how to create your own purple goldfish. And so we have a 4-stage, 12-step program that we call the idea process. So the I in the idea process is what we call inquire. And in the inquire phase, you're asking the questions, you're getting the insight, you're starting to look at that customer and how they interact with you across their journey. And specifically what you're doing is looking for gaps or opportunities to be able to enhance the experience. And once you've identified those potential gaps and opportunities, you then jump to the D in the idea framework, and we call that the design process. And what you're doing there is you're looking at those gaps or opportunities. You're asking the big questions to understand if they're in alignment with what your customer values and what you want to stand for. And then you want to start to prioritize and organize those ideas. And once you've done that, you're then ready for what we call the evaluate phase. And in the evaluate phase, you're looking at how is that going to impact our organization internally? How do we actually potentially show that to our customers to be able to validate that new thing, that it's actually valued? And then we're going to make decisions on what we're going to pilot and actually test. And once we've made those decisions, we've done the pilot, we're going to look at the results, and we're ready for the last step in the idea framework. We call it the advance phase. And so you want to show that results to potentially management. You want to get their buy-in. You want to determine the resources you need to train your people on that new process or idea. And ultimately, you want to determine how you're going to measure the impact going forward. Inquire, design, evaluate, and advance. And with that, I want to open it up. We may have time for just maybe one question, Thomas or Denise. And then I've got one little extra and a final story I want to share to make sure we finish right at the top of the hour.
Thank you so much, Stan. And the way we're going to handle questions is if you can wiggle your mouse, you will see in the bottom panel an option to chat. From within there, once you click on that, you can send a message to, and you can choose Denise, in the bracket it says host. So Denise Firing is hosting today, and Denise in bracket host, you can send a message to Denise, and Denise will then forward questions. Well, while we wait for people to gather their thoughts, maybe a quick question and then the extra question, right? So we've got a 1.5, the extra scoop on top. So Denise, let's start with a quick question while people gather their thoughts.
Great. All right. So we do have a question. We have a couple of questions, but first, Dan, I made a comment to the group. I remember staying at a Kimpton hotel here, a staycation, which in Arizona we like to do in the summer with my two daughters. They brought us 2 goldfish. They were like 7 and 3 at the time. And I tell you, we visited that place for like 4 or 5 years after that. It was just, that was just such a great touch, and it impressed me so much.
More importantly, Denise, did you tell other people about that experience?
Absolutely. We put it out on, I don't even know if Facebook was there, but we texted people, took pictures.
Sure.
And it was really special. So, all right. So here's a question. Are there strategies for hiring people who will naturally tend to think about how to do little extra things? And how do you teach people, how does an organization teach their people to think this way if it doesn't come naturally?
Yeah, that's a tremendous question. And I have the honor of coming out to the Compete Through Service Symposium in April, where I'm going to share what's called the Green Goldfish. And so the Green Goldfish was a realization that you can spend all of the time to design the ideal experience. If you don't have the team members that are bought in and engaged in order to deliver that, it's useless. And so what we'll focus on in April is, I looked at another 1,000 examples to determine exactly that, Denise. How do you actually drive engagement and reinforce a culture where people feel like they're empowered to do this? So that's a little bit of a primer for what we're going to do. And there's a book called The Green Goldfish if people want to dive in further.
Excellent. Now we're going to go for the Lanyap question, Denise.
All right. Let's go back to the beginning where you were talking about cold brands that they're competent, but they're cold.
Right.
How do organizations move from cold to warm while keeping their competency?
Right. Now, here's the thing. You can exist as a brand in that bottom right of being high competence but low warmth. But I think part of that is looking at where there are opportunities to be able to show that little bit of warmth. So how do you either add value as part of that transaction, or how do you spend a little extra time to make it easier for them when they're doing business with you? And I think those things are appreciated and are seen as thoughtful, as opposed to being a little exclusive and forcing the customer to actually bend to the way the brand does business. So that's great. So really quickly before people jump off, I tell people I can't talk about doing the little extra without actually doing it myself. So I called my Uncle Jeff, who lives in Seattle. He's got a small business out there in Seattle. And I said, I want to do something special. He said, no problem, Stan. He says, you can make the book free today on Amazon. And so if you want to pick it up, you'll have till midnight tonight, Pacific time. If you want to download it, it'll cost $0 to download it. Sometimes it works better from a desktop or laptop than it does on a mobile, but know you have up until midnight if you want to do it. You don't need a code. In fact, you don't even need a Kindle. You can get the Kindle Reader app. So I want to finish real quickly with just a quick story about Disney, when Disney first opened. So 1957, Walt loved parades. He decided he wanted to do a parade during the month of December in 1957. Now, the only problem, it was going to cost Disney $350,000 to pull it off. So when his accountants heard this, they flipped out. They found Walt and they pleaded with him. They said, Walt, don't do the parade. These people next month, they're already going to be in the park. They're not going to miss the parade because they're not even expecting it. And Walt looked at his accountants and he said, you know what? That's exactly why we need to do the parade. He said, here at Disney, we always need to give our customers more than what they expect. Because if we don't, and they decide not to come back to the park, it's going to cost us 10 times the amount of money to get them to come back. Well, what did Disney do in 1957? They did that parade. And so here's the takeaway. Walt's mantra was this: always exceed expectations. In fact, he was so enamored by this, he had his own word for it. And Walt called it plussing. And for him, plussing was this idea of how do you plus up and do a little bit more for the customers that you serve. So my hope as we finish today, you're thinking about ways that your brand either adds value or reduces the maintenance for the customers that you serve. And I hope you're willing to ask yourself, what's our version of the DoubleTree chocolate chip cookie? You know, what's our version of the Disney parade? And I hope you're willing to ask yourself, what's our purple goldfish? And with that, I will throw it back to you, both Denise and Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stan, and thank you also for fighting through the automatic lighting change that you have back there. So that was yeah. I'm going to adopt that dance for my next presentation. That'll be part of what I do. So thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you from ASU and the Center for Services Leadership on this special webinar for our board members. And I hope to see you soon at our board member events coming up. The next one in person will be in November 7 and 8 at the Phoenix Convention Center here. So we're looking forward to that. And we are looking forward to seeing Stan again at our symposium April 1, 2, and 3 next year. So thank you everybody and have a great day.